there, drone fans. Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's clip, I'd like to review the brand new Mavic Pro Platinum blades that were part of an announcement from DJI a few weeks ago where they introduced two new quads to the market. Now at that event, they released both the Mavic Pro Platinum and the Phantom 4 Pro Obsidian models. And as cool as that Obsidian looks and as much fun as that might be to fly, what really caught my attention was the Mavic Pro Platinum with an extended flight time of 30 minutes and the promise of a quieter operation. Now, if you guys have watched the channel at all, you know I'm a huge fan of that Mavic Pro. I love that quad. Any day I can put that thing up in the air is a good day, and I fly that probably more than any other quad I have. But if I'm being honest, it's a noisy quad, just like all quads are noisy. So if there's some way I can reduce that noise, it'll dramatically improve my flying experience. So I thought, let me look at what this Mavic Pro Platinum brings to the market, and I found two major engineering changes between the original Mavic Pro and the new Mavic Pro Platinum. The first one has to do with the electronic speed controls. They've updated those from the originals, which were square wave driven, to a sinusoidal version, which is really kind of leading edge on the technology. The second change they made was the blade system. They've introduced a radically different blade design on the new Mavic Pro Platinum. And if I'm trying to backdate my original Mavic Pro, I can't really change the ESCs. That's going to mean ripping the thing apart and putting a bunch of new electronics in there. So that's kind of out of the question. But if I can use these new blades on my original Mavic Pro, maybe I'm going to get some noise reduction in there. So I thought, let me buy a couple of sets of these. When they come in, I'll play with them for a couple of weeks, put the Mavic up and see if I hear a difference in that quality of sound. And I'll let you guys decide for yourselves. So what I'm going to do in this clip is I'm actually going to do a physical examination of the new blades and compare them to the original Mavic Pro blades. I'll also put the quad up with the original blades and the new blades on it at different heights, and I'll do comparisons side by side and show you exactly what the difference is in the audio quality. Then I'll spend a little bit of time trying to explain the physics of why this blade may make such a difference in it. Now I don't expect I'm going to get additional flight time out of it because I think most of the gain they get there is through the ESC change, but maybe I'll get a little extra flight time out of it. But I'm hoping that these blades really reduce the amount of noise that quad produces when it's flying. And then in the final section, I'll do some conclusions around what I think made the difference and if it really is that big a difference and worth buying these blades. I'm also going to give a couple of sets of these blades away to people that have watched this clip. So when you get to the end of the clip, there'll be some instructions in there on how you can enter the contest to win a couple of sets of these blades. But for me, I love the fact that this company is constantly innovating and making changes to their quads, and the fact that they allow me to take some of that new technology and apply it to gear that I already own. That's just a bonus for me. So hang on and I'll get into it a little bit more detail. Here I have the original Mavic Pro blade sitting right next to the brand new Mavic Pro Platinum blade, so I can do a physical comparison between the two. One of the first things that jumped out at me when I saw this blade design from DJI a few weeks back at their announcement was the fundamental change they made in the wingtip. And since the blades have arrived, I've had a chance to really examine them more closely, and there are other more subtle changes they made that could have a big impact on the performance of the blade, and I'll go through those individually when I do the comparison. First, I'd like to start with the original Mavic Pro blade. What you have here is a traditional propeller design with a flat surface that terminates in a square end. I've also got a very consistent thickness along the leading edge and the trailing edge throughout the length of the blade, which means this is going to be a very stable surface in flight without a lot of flexibility. And again, this is a very, very common propeller design. You find that on most quads out there today because it just works. It's not as efficient as some of the newer designs, but it does the job. Now for comparison purposes, DJI has done this on all their other quads up to this point. So I've got the Spark, that's a Phantom 3. Here's a Phantom 4 blade. And then finally an Inspire blade. This is an Inspire 2 blade actually. And you can see that they've all got that square end piece on it with very, very similar designs between them. Now what's changed with the new blade is DJI is really going for a much more efficient blade. They're trying to make it a little better as far as conserving energy, and they're also trying to make it a little bit quieter. So when I look at the brand new Platinum design, the first thing again that I talked about was this sort of sweep back end here. Now when I described this blade a couple of weeks back when I was talking about the announcement, I inadvertently called this a winglet. And a lot of you guys immediately jumped on me and said, Rick, it's not a winglet. And you were right to do that. But in my defense, I didn't actually have the blade in my hand at that point. And I was looking at a picture that to my eye looked like this end bent up like that, which would have absolutely made it a winglet. But the fact that this is flat and just slopes back at the end, really this blade is called a raked wingtip blade, which from an engineering perspective, both the winglet that goes up like this and this raked wingtip are designed to do the same thing. They're both engineered to reduce the amount of turbulence out here at the tip and the vortices that are created as this slices through the air. So fundamentally they do the same thing, but thank you for keeping me honest. I appreciate you guys commenting and letting me know that I goofed on that one. So let's do a little comparison between the two. So the first thing you'll see is that wingtip. I talked about that briefly. Also, it's got a consistent thickness and then thins out when it gets out to that wingtip. So you can see how flexible the end of that blade is. Another difference between them is the width of the blade here. You can see when you hold them side by side that the new blade is obviously much wider than the original Mavic blade. And if I hold it up to the leading edge there, you can see there's a lot of extra material behind it. So I've got a larger surface area just based on that width. And then also, if you look really closely, the new blade is a tiny bit longer than the old blade. It's hard to put them right on top of each other, but I'm going to say it's about 1/8 of an inch longer out there. So overall, a much more expansive surface over here on the new blade. Another thing that's a little less obvious is the way the blade mounts. So when I look at the original Mavic blade, it's pretty flat from the hub where it mounts all the way out to the tip. But if you look closely, and I'm not sure the camera's going to pick this up, but there's a bit of a divot on this new Mavic Platinum blade. It actually goes down and then flattens out right there. So I've got that little divot underneath, which is kind of an interesting feature, and I'm sure that helps to reduce the noise and make it a little more efficient. And then the last thing, which again is a subtle difference, is when I hold them side by side, and maybe you can see that against that background, you can see that this blade has a much more pronounced curve on the bottom than this one. It's got a much bigger arc as it goes through its bottom section than this guy does. And all of those features together, you know, the additional surface area, the flexibility of the tip, that rake back or raked wingtip on the end, as well as this curve on the bottom, all help to make this a much more sophisticated blade. So what that's telling me is that DJI realizes that in addition to building better batteries and more aerodynamic designs for their quads, by improving the blades that are on those quads, they can improve the efficiency of the quad and they can knock down some of the noise of that quad in flight. Now the next section, I'm going to actually put the Mavic up with the original blades first, then I'll put it up at the exact same height with the new blades, and you can do a side-by-side comparison at various heights and see if you think it makes a difference in the sound quality. To do a fair comparison, I'm going to have to fly the Mavic with both sets of blades. First, I'll put it up with the standard Mavic Pro blades on it at heights of 15 feet, 20 feet, 50 feet, and 100 feet. Then I'll land the quad, I'll swap out the battery for a fresh one, I'll put the brand new Mavic Platinum blades on it, put it back up at those same heights, then we'll go inside and do a comparison side by side to see if there is a difference. In this section, I'd like to discuss the science behind the changes that DJI made to the brand new Mavic Pro Platinum props and how those changes could have a big impact on the amount of noise these new propellers generate. So let's start with the props. Any propeller, or actually any airfoil in general, has a fairly traditional shape. It's got a bit of a curve in the top and a flatter bottom section. And what happens is, as that form cuts through the air rushing over the top has to travel a further distance to catch up with the air coming underneath, and it develops a low pressure system because of that. So you've got, as this flies through the air, high pressure underneath, low pressure above. Nature hates that. Nature wants to equalize that pressure difference, so it does that by pushing that high pressure system up to equalize it, bringing the wing up with it. So it's a little more complicated than that, but that's the basic physics behind it. The problem is, where they meet at the end, at this tip, you get a ton of churn and vortices that develop on a traditional propeller like this, and that vortices and chaos out there creates a lot of noise. And that's what you're hearing when it's flying. So if there's a way we can minimize that amount of turbulence at the end, that would help to reduce the noise just based on that. These new propellers have this raked wingtip on the end, and what that does is let that turbulence sort of slide off back and equalize more slowly. So they're minimizing the amount of turbulence out there, which does reduce the noise. The other side benefit of that, it also improves the performance of the propeller, because if I've got a ton of turbulence out here, think of it as sort of molasses in the air, I've got to fight through that turbulence to spin this propeller, which means I'm using more energy to spin it. If I can minimize that and lower the viscosity of that air, I can actually spin through it faster. So it does two things. It helps to lower the amount of turbulence and noise, and also makes the propeller more efficient. Another thing they did, which I discussed earlier, is they made this surface wider here, which means that air's got to travel a longer distance to get across it and catch up, which means it's moving even faster and makes the propeller more efficient. So I develop a much lower air pressure above and a higher pressure underneath, which lifts it with less energy using the propeller. Now, in addition to that, we should talk about the noise. And noise is an interesting thing because noise has a lot of components to it, and loudness, or noise in general, is really dependent on two factors. The first one has to do with the amplitude of the sound. So the amount of air pressure it's generating is the first thing you'll feel. And you feel that when like a bomb goes off or an explosion goes off, that's the air pressure coming at you, and you notice that right away. The second part of it, which is a little more subtle, is the frequency of that noise. And that's the part that makes it annoying. So certain frequencies to us in general are annoying and some others are less annoying. So a good example of that would be if you're sitting in a classroom, even if you're at the back of the classroom and somebody rakes their fingers across that chalkboard, that's not a good sound for most people to hear. A dentist drill is another good example. So with those two sounds, they don't have to be incredibly loud to be annoying, just the frequency of that is annoying. So I wanted to look at exactly how much noise this is generating, right? And that's based on decibels, that's the air pressure that it generates, that's the loud component of it. I also wanted to analyze what frequencies it was generating. So if DJI was able to reduce both the air pressure it generates, right, the amplitude of it, and change the frequencies to be less annoying frequencies, both of those are good things in making the prop seem quieter. In this next section, I'm going to give you some examples of exactly what they changed using their own metrics. I've also done some recordings of the quad up in the air at different heights with both set of propellers on it, and I've run them through what's called an audio spectrum analyzer, which will show you exactly the frequencies that they generate and the amplitude behind those frequencies. And when I go through those two examples, it should be pretty clear that they're doing a real good job with these new propellers of both reducing the amplitude, the amount of pressure this thing generates, and also the frequencies that are annoying to most people when it's flying. So stay tuned and I'll get into that in a second. Okay, the first chart I'm looking at here is the one that was published by DJI on their website when these propellers were released. And you've got two axes to look at. The vertical axis goes from 20 to 80. We'll call it dB, which is a measure of the amplitude or the power of the sound. The horizontal axis has to do with frequency, and that's the pitch of the sound. That would be the nails scraping across the blackboard. The one going up would be the fireworks going off, so the amplitude versus the frequency. Now, what's interesting is not all of us have the same exact hearing capabilities. It's an interesting fact that as you get older, you can hear less and less frequencies on both ends of the spectrum. It typically affects the higher frequencies more. So I'm in my 50s, there's not a lot I can hear above 20 kilohertz. So if I get up to that 20K number, I'm probably deaf at that range. And it starts creeping down more and more. So if you look closely at that chart, if I look above the 10,000 frequency, you're actually, most of us, if you're older, can't hear beyond that anyway. So they're not going to do a lot as far as making it less noisy for me if they reduce the frequencies above that. But if I look right in the middle of that chart between 1,000 hertz and 10,000 hertz, that seems to be where they've removed most of the noise. So based on their chart, you've got quite a bit of difference there in that frequency band. Looking at it on numbers alone, I've got about a 5 dB reduction in noise there. And honestly, in science, if you look at the decibel reduction, most people will tell you that science will say that if I reduce it by 3 dBs, that I've actually cut that noise in half. Honestly, when you listen to it, for me and for most people, it's got to be about a 5 dB change for me to say, okay, it's half the noise. But either way, in the middle of that chart, they've really reduced that noise quite a bit. Now, what's really interesting to me is when you look at that 5,000 to 10,000, which is where most of us find the most annoying frequencies in life. That tends to be the place where a lot of things exist in that frequency band that we consider to be annoying, right? Those are frequencies we don't like, and if a quad's making those frequencies, we think of it as a noisy quad. And that's where they've really reduced a lot of those frequencies. So between that 5,000 and 10,000, you can see that they've had the major improvements there. And that has to do with all those changes I described when I did the physical comparison between the two, the wider blade, flexible tip at the end, the fact that they've got that raked wingtip out there, all of that contributes to reduce those frequencies. Now, I like them a lot as a company, and I trust them that this chart is something that they've measured and they've tested, but it still doesn't tell me a lot about what that spectrum looks like, because there's a lot of frequencies in there. So are there ones that are still louder than others? Because again, you can't look at one chart with just a line going across it to understand the depth of those frequencies behind it. So what I did was take the sound audio recordings that I had, put the quad up at 20 feet, and then ran those through a spectrum analyzer. And what you're looking at now is an analysis of that spectrum. So the top one is actually a chart of all the frequencies that are generated by those propellers at 20 feet above the camera on the Mavic Pro Standard. Now, it's hard to look at that because you've got a lot of information in there. So if you look at the top of it, that's the highest frequency possible. That's in the 22,000 hertz or 22 kilohertz range. The bottom is down around 90 hertz. So that's the lowest tone you'll hear. And then obviously when you get up to the green, that's the highest tone you'll hear. But what I did here was try to give you a comparison between the Mavic Pro Standard and the Mavic Pro Platinum. And you'll notice pretty quickly that the darker the image is, the louder that particular frequency is. And also, the lower on the chart it is, the lower the frequency is. So if you look closely at that band between 92 and say 9703, which is about 10,000 hertz, you'll see that you've reduced, looking between the two, you'll notice there are bands of frequencies that are missing, which means those frequencies are no longer being generated by the propellers. But more importantly, all of the frequencies through the spectrum from the green all the way down to the red are less intense, which means it's not as loud. So they've not only reduced the amplitude of the frequencies, but they've eliminated some of those annoying frequencies in that band that we hear. So overall, I do trust them, and their chart seems to be pretty accurate based on the basic spectral analysis I've done on it. But I'm very impressed by the fact that they're able to not only reduce frequencies, not across the whole band, but in that band that are annoying, in addition to which they've been able to reduce the amplitude of those frequencies. So those two things together really prove to me that these propellers are quieter, not just from a testing perspective, but from an experience perspective as well. Stay tuned and I'll get into the final conclusions around what I think these propellers provide for the amount of money they're charging for them. In this last section, I wanted to spend a little bit of time to do a quick wrap up and give you my impressions of how these blades sound and the impact they have on my flight experience. So I spent a lot of time doing a physical comparison between the old blades and the brand new Mavic Pro Platinum blades, talked about why those engineering changes might be important in helping to reduce the noise those blades generate. I wanted to get it up in the air and get some real world recordings of how that thing sounds at a bunch of different heights that you typically fly at, so you can use your own ears and determine from your perspective, are they quieter, are they blades I should invest in? Because again, it's so subjective. Then I thought, let me spend a little bit of time with the science behind it, because for me, anytime I test a product, I've really got to extensively test it before I call a bluff of a company that claims it can do something. And in this case, everything I've done, both the physical examination, the audio recordings, and the science behind it, lead me to believe that these blades are a better choice for your Mavic Pro Quad. Now, are they quieter? People ask me, are they quieter? I don't know if they're quieter necessarily, but I will tell you that they're less annoying, which is really what matters to me. So when I put the quad up with both sets of blades, I was constantly struck by how less annoying the new blades were on that thing when it was flying at any given height. And I fly around a lot of other people, and I've asked them, you know, they happened to be there when I was testing them. I said, do you hear that? Okay, great. Do you hear that? Which of those is more pleasing to you? These blades by far were the overwhelming choice of people that I was flying with. So my recommendation would be, if you're gonna buy new blades for your Mavic Pro, go with the new blades. They're $1 more. I think they're $9 for the old blades, 10 or 11 bucks for the new blades. It makes no sense to not use these new blades because they may actually be more efficient as well. I haven't tested that part of it yet because I really believe most of that efficiency gain they've got on the Mavic Pro Platinum comes from those new ESCs, but I'll spend some time in the air with it. So far, flying it as much as I haven't noticed a big dramatic increase in the extendability of it, or I should say the airtime of it, but I'll spend some time testing that and we'll see if that improves as well. All right, so the contest. Now I was lucky enough to score 2 full sets of these blades. So I have 2 sets of 4 each that I'm gonna give to you guys. I know they're kind of hard to get a hold of, they're in limited supply, but I've got 1 set for me and I've got 2 extra sets that I'm gonna give away. The way I'm gonna do that is the first set I'm gonna give away to our newsletter group. If you're not part of the newsletter group, there's a link below where you can join it. It doesn't cost anything, and we don't badger you with stuff. I don't share that list with anybody. It's just a list of people that watch the channel, my Drone Valley family, that I send a newsletter once or twice a month that includes maybe coupons or discounts or cool things that are going on in the industry. I'll give you a week to join that. After a week's time, I'll just pick a name at random from that list and we'll send you a set of these blades. If you don't have a Mavic Pro, no big deal. I'll send you a set of blades for whatever quad you happen to be flying at the time, and then I'll move on to the next one. And I'll find somebody who's got a Mavic Pro that can use them. The second set I'm going to give away to our Patreon group, and I've talked about that a couple of times already. That's a group that supports us with a small donation a month, and I run contests with them on a regular basis, and I'm going to give the second set to those guys. I'm going to wait a week there too, so if you want to join that, I think you can get on that for less than $1 or maybe $1 a month, and then you're part of that group and you get sort of other things that I don't publish on the channel, so maybe clips or opinions or different things that I'm thinking about, blog posts, those type of things. So it's kind of a cool place to be. If you decide to do that, you'll get in on that. In addition to that, I'm also, to those two groups, going to give away 2 sets of regular Mavic blades in addition to these new Mavic Pro Platinum blades. So there'll be 3 sets of blades given out to each of those 2 groups. So you can decide if you want to join the news group or join the Patreon group. Whatever you decide, I'll do that. So that's pretty much it for today. So thanks an awful lot for watching. I love putting these clips together and I love testing new technology like this. So hopefully you guys find a lot of value in this. If you have any questions about anything I've covered, drop them in the comments below. If I've goofed again on anything, again, I goofed on the wingtips before, but if I've goofed on anything else, correct me below politely and we can have a conversation about it. And again, I love doing these clips and I really appreciate your support. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button below. I've got a ton more content coming on the Mavic and a bunch of other quads, including the submersible. I've been swimming that thing like crazy the last couple of weeks. It'll be really exciting stuff to watch. So again, thanks an awful lot. And until next time, happy flying.